He said it while I was sitting right across from him, not behind my back, not over the phone, right there, at his own dining room table, with the lawyer between us and the overhead light buzzing faintly like it had something to add. "She's been a bit confused lately," my son said, not looking at me. "We just think it's better if she doesn't have to manage all of this on her own anymore." I set my hands flat on the table, not because I was steadying myself, because I needed to feel something solid while I decided whether to correct him now or wait. I waited. The lawyer, a man named Mr. Arsenault, with thin-framed glasses and a practiced expression of neutrality, nodded once and slid a folder toward the center of the table. "Mrs. Callahan, this is the proposed power of attorney for property that your son and daughter-in-law have asked me to draft. It would authorize your son to manage your financial affairs and real estate holdings on your behalf, should you become—" "I'd like to read it myself," I said. Mr. Arsenault paused. "Of course," my son exhaled. My daughter-in-law, seated to his left in a blouse I'd never seen before, smoothed the tablecloth with 2 fingers. Neither of them said anything, but I felt the shared glance they passed over my head like a weather system moving through a room. I opened the folder and began to read. The document was 12 pages. I read all 12. My son cleared his throat twice. My daughter-in-law offered me water I didn't touch. Somewhere in the back of the house, their dog clicked across hardwood. I turned each page slowly, not because I was struggling, but because I intended to understand every clause before I said another word. There it was, on page 7. The trigger condition. The POA would activate not only upon a formal medical declaration of incapacity, but also upon the written agreement of 2 parties, my son and a physician of his choosing. A physician of his choosing. I read the line again. "Who selects the physician?" I asked. "It's standard wording," my daughter-in-law said, before Mr. Arsenault could answer. I looked at her. "I didn't ask you, dear." She blinked. Mr. Arsenault removed his glasses briefly. My son leaned forward. "Mom, we're trying to help you. After what happened in February." I slipped on the front steps, I said. "In February. It was -18, and the city hadn't salted the sidewalk. I broke my wrist. My mind was fine. You were in the hospital for 4 days. With a broken wrist. You seemed disoriented when we visited." I closed the folder and looked at my son directly. He was 51 years old. I had taught him to read. I had driven him to hockey practice at 5:30 in the morning for 6 winters straight. I had held his hand when his father died, when he cried in the hospital parking lot and said he didn't know how to be the man of the family now. I had told him he didn't have to be anything except himself. Looking at him now, I wondered what had happened to that boy, not with anger, just with the quiet, hollow sadness of recognizing something you have lost and can no longer name. "I'd like a copy of this document," I said to Mr. Arsenault, "and I'd like time to have my own lawyer review it before I sign anything." My son sat back. "You don't have a lawyer, Mom." "I will by Thursday," I said. I drove home alone. My wrist had healed cleanly. My hands were steady on the wheel. I took the long way back, along the Rewr road where the ice had finally broken and the water was moving again, dark and quick and unbothered. My house was a red brick, semi-detached in a quiet part of Guelph, the kind of street where people still waved from their driveways. We had bought it when my husband was still alive, when the price seemed enormous and the mortgage felt like a mountain. Now it was paid off, and worth more than either of us could have imagined, and apparently that made it interesting to people who hadn't paid a cent toward it. I parked in the driveway and sat for a moment. The lilac bush along the front fence had survived another winter. It always did. Inside, I made tea and sat at the kitchen table with the copy of the document Mr. Arsenault had printed for me. I read page 7 again. Then page 9, which outlined the transfer of financial management, including all registered accounts, the RRSP I had been contributing to since I was 32 years old, the TFSA I had opened with my husband the year they introduced the program, and the checking account where my CPP and nursing pension were deposited each month. He would manage all of it. with a physician of his choosing confirming I was no longer capable. I thought about my son as he was at that table tonight. The way he spoke about me to Mr. Arsenault before he spoke to me. The way he said she instead of my mother, as if I were already abstract, as if I were already a file to be managed, rather than a woman in the room. I got up and found the small notebook I kept in the desk drawer in the hallway. My husband used to call it my evidence folder. I opened it to a fresh page and wrote the date at the top. Then I wrote, "Call Dr. Pearson. Schedule cognitive assessment. Do it first." Underlined it twice. I didn't sleep badly. I slept the way you sleep when you've made a decision and you know you intend to keep it quietly, without drama, with your mind already 3 steps ahead. By Thursday, I had a lawyer. Her name was Miss Okafor, and she worked out of a small office above a pharmacy on Stone Road. She was younger than I expected, direct in a way I immediately appreciated, and she did not speak to me slowly or repeat herself unnecessarily. We sat across from each other at a table covered in tidy stacks of paper, and I told her everything. The February fall, the hospital, the dining room table, the 12-page document, page 7. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "The physician of choosing clause is not standard. Whoever drafted this either made a significant error or made it intentionally." "I don't believe it was an error," I said. She nodded. "Do you have your own will currently on file?" I did. A simple one, written after my husband passed. Everything split evenly between my son and my granddaughter. At the time, that had seemed fair, generous, even. Now it read differently to me, the way old photographs sometimes do, capturing a version of yourself that no longer quite fits. "I'd like to change it," I said. She looked at me. "Entirely? I'd like to review my options," I said. "And I'd like to do it carefully." She nodded again and reached for her notepad. On the way home, I stopped at Tim Hortons. I ordered a medium dark roast and a plain bagel and sat at a window table watching the parking lot. A woman about my age was helping her husband into a car, holding his arm gently with both hands, taking her time. There was nothing dramatic about it. It was just love in its plainest form, patient and physical and unwitnessed. I thought about my husband. He had died 4 years ago, swiftly, without warning, on a Tuesday afternoon in October. One moment, he was raking leaves in the backyard. Then, he was not. The ambulance had come and I had followed in my own car because I couldn't think of another way to move through the world in those first hours. I had sat in the waiting room at the hospital for 2.5 hours before a doctor came to find me. I had driven home alone in the dark. My son had called the next morning. He was grieving too, I knew that. But something had shifted afterward, subtly, in the way he spoke to me. A new frequency of checking in, a new habit of speaking on my behalf. At family dinners, he began answering questions that had been directed at me. At my last GP appointment, which he insisted on attending, he had summarized my symptoms before I could finish my own sentences. It had started as concern, I think. I genuinely believe that. But somewhere between concern and control, something had gotten lost. And now I was sitting in a Tim Hortons reading a legal document that would allow him to decide, in partnership with a physician of his choosing, that I was no longer fit to make my own decisions. I finished my coffee and drove to the walk-in clinic on Courtright Road. The doctor who saw me was efficient and kind. I explained what I wanted. A standard cognitive screening, documented and signed, something I could put on file. She looked slightly surprised. Most people didn't come in requesting this, but she asked no unnecessary questions. We ran through the assessment together. It took about 20 minutes. When we finished, she said, "Mrs. Callahan, your results are well within the normal range. Completely unremarkable, which is exactly what you want. May I have a copy in writing?" She printed 2. I folded them and put them in my coat pocket, and I walked out into the gray April afternoon, feeling something I hadn't felt in months. Not triumph, preparedness. My granddaughter called that evening, the way she always did, without warning and at a slightly inconvenient hour. She was in her second year at Waterloo, studying environmental science. She called me on the way to the library, on the way back from the library, occasionally while still inside the library. She never seemed to register the difference. "Grandma, I heard you went to Uncle the First. I mean, you went to Dad's place last night." "I did. And I read a document." She was quiet for a moment. "The POA thing?" I paused. "You knew about it?" "Dad mentioned it at Easter. He said he was worried about you living alone." "I've been living alone for 4 years." "I know," she said softly. "I told him that." She was 22. She came to visit without a reason, without an agenda, without taking photographs of my house to send to anyone. She called me to ask how I slept, whether my wrist had been bothering me in the cold, whether I was still doing the morning walks the physiotherapist had recommended. She had driven 2.5 hours from Waterloo last November just to help me reorganize the pantry shelves, which I had not asked her to do and which took the better part of an afternoon, and which she had seemed genuinely happy to do. She reminded me of my husband, not in looks, in the way she paid attention. "I'm handling it," I told her. "Are you sure? Because if you need anything..." "I know where to find you," I said. "How are your studies?" She told me about a wetland restoration project and a professor she found frustrating and a new coffee shop near campus that actually made proper chai. She talked the way she always talked, quickly and warmly, and without pausing long enough for me to feel sorry for myself. After we hung up, I sat in Harold's old chair by the fireplace and thought about what I was going to do next. I took out the notebook. Under the first item, I wrote 4 more. Call RBC. Review all outgoing transfers and pre-authorized payments. Request account history 12 months. Call Miss Okafor. Begin new will. Request independent POA, name her, not him. Write the letter. I underlined the last one 3 times. The bank visit was a Tuesday morning in late April. The branch manager's name was Priya, and she was professional and thorough and only slightly startled when I asked her to pull up the complete list of pre-authorized transactions on my account going back 14 months. She laid it on the desk between us. I had brought my glasses and I used them. There were more transactions than I remembered approving. A monthly transfer to my son's household account, which I had set up years ago to help when the children were young and money was tight. That part I knew. What I had not known was that the amount had been quietly increased twice. It appeared without my explicit authorization. There were also 2 pre-authorized charges for a home monitoring service subscription that was registered to my daughter-in-law's email address, and a recurring charge to a legal document storage service I had never heard of. I did not raise my voice. I said, "I'd like to cancel all of these, please, permanently." Priya looked at the screen, then at me. "All of them?" "Every single one. And I'd like a new account opened today, a TFSA, joint with my lawyer's firm as co-trustee, with specific conditions I've drafted here. I set Miss Locke Okafor's 1-page summary on the desk. My granddaughter is the named beneficiary. The funds are accessible to her at age 25 or earlier under written hardship conditions." Priya read the summary carefully. Then she looked up. "Would you like me to call in our estate planning specialist?" "Yes," I said. "And please bring coffee if there is any. This may take a while." It took 3 hours. By the time I walked out, the afternoon light had gone flat and the parking lot was nearly empty. My knees ached. I bought a sandwich from the deli next door and ate it in my car, looking at the bare trees along the boulevard. My phone had 4 missed calls, all from my son's number. I put it in my bag and drove home. The calls continued through the evening. At 8:30, my daughter-in-law texted, "We need to talk. There may have been a misunderstanding." I read it twice, then set the phone face down on the coffee table. There had been no misunderstanding. That was exactly the problem. My son arrived at 9 the next morning without calling ahead. I heard his car in the driveway, and I did not rush to the door. I was finishing my tea. When I answered, he stood on the step with his coat still on, hands in his pockets, in that posture I recognized from when he was a teenager, trying to seem calm about something that was bothering him. "Mom," he said. "The bank called." "I know. I was there." He exhaled. "You canceled everything." "I canceled the transfers I did not authorize," I said. "The ones I did authorize ended years ago when the reason for them no longer existed." "That's not Mom. Those were for family expenses." "You agreed to that." "I agreed to a specific amount in a specific year for a specific purpose." What I found on that statement was not what I agreed to. He looked past me into the house, then back at me. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside. He sat at the kitchen table the way he used to as a child, elbows forward, looking around the room as if reorienting himself. I made a second cup of tea I did not intend to drink. "The POA was meant to protect you," he said finally. "The POA was meant to protect the house," I replied. "And the accounts." He opened his mouth. "Please don't tell me I'm being emotional," I said. "I've read the document. I've had it reviewed by a lawyer. I've had a cognitive assessment done. I know exactly what I'm doing." He stared at me. "You had a cognitive test?" "I did. Would you like to see the results?" He was quiet for a long moment. Something moved across his face that I couldn't quite name surprise, or something underneath surprise. Discomfort, maybe. The discomfort of someone realizing they had underestimated the person they thought they were managing. "I only wanted to make sure you'd be looked after," he said, and I believe some part of him meant it. "Then look after me," I said. "Don't look after my assets." He left an hour later, without the resolution he had come for. I stood in the doorway and watched him back out of the driveway. The lilac bush was budding along the fence, small purple nubs just beginning to open. My husband had planted it the spring after we moved in. He said lilacs were the most honest flower. They bloomed exactly when they were ready, and not a moment before. The new will took 2 visits to Miss Okafor's office to finalize. We sat across from each other at the same paper-covered table, working through it clause by clause. I was the sole trustee. My granddaughter was the primary beneficiary of the house, the registered accounts, and the modest investment portfolio my husband and I had built over 30 years of careful attention. There was a provision for my son, a fixed sum, fair and specific, accompanied by a note that was my idea and that Miss Okafor included without comment. The power of attorney for property named Miss Okafor's firm as interim administrator and my granddaughter as the appointed agent, to come into effect only upon formal medical declaration from 2 independent physicians, neither of which could be selected by any beneficiary of my estate. I had read about that clause online at 11 o'clock on a Wednesday night, and I had typed it out and brought it to Miss Okafor in my own words. She had cleaned up the language and told me it was absolutely enforceable. On the day I signed, I wore the gray wool blazer I had bought for my last nursing conference years ago. It still fit. Miss Okafor had one of her associates witness the documents. When it was done, I sat for a moment before standing up. "You seem very certain," Miss Okafor said. "Not as a challenge, as an observation." "I've been certain for some time," I said. "I just didn't act on it until now." She nodded. "In my experience, that's often how it goes." I took the long way home, past the river, where the ice had been gone for weeks now, past the old arena where my son had played hockey, and I had sat in the cold stands with a thermos of tea, watching him skate with the focused seriousness of a child who believed everything he did mattered. He had been a good boy. I still believed that. People don't become complicated because they stop being good. They become complicated because life makes more demands than their goodness was prepared for. My granddaughter arrived that Friday with a bag of groceries and no particular reason. "I was already driving through," she said, which was not true since Guelph was not between anywhere she needed to be. She made us both tea and sat across from me at the kitchen table with the energy she always had, slightly too much for a room, in the best way. She was wearing her university jacket, and there was a smudge of something blue on her left hand, ink or marker, the way she'd always come home from school with at least one unexplained stain. "Grandma," she said after a while, "what's happening with Dad?" I held my mug. "What has he told you?" "Not much. He's being very controlled about it. Careful. She tilted her head. Which means he's upset. He's adjusting to something, I said. She looked at me with those clear eyes that never missed anything. Are you okay? Yes, I said. For the first time in a while, I am. She didn't press. She never did. We spent the afternoon pulling out the winter things from the hall closet, sorting through what could be donated and what should be washed and folded for next year. She found my husband's old flannel shirt at the back of the shelf and held it up. Can I take this? I looked at it for a moment. The worn collar. The missing button at the third hole that I had always meant to replace. Yes, I said. She put it carefully into her bag. Before she left, she hugged me in the doorway, the long kind. You don't have to tell me what's going on, she said into my shoulder. But I want you to know I'm not trying to get anything from you. I just like being here. I know, I said. That's precisely the point. She looked at me, confused in the sweet way she had been confused as a child whenever adults said things she wasn't old enough to decode. I patted her hand. I'll explain it all when the time is right, I said. The call from Mr. Arsenault came on a Monday morning. He informed me, with careful neutrality, that my son had been in contact with his firm to inquire about the status of the previous documents. He mentioned that he had informed my son those documents were null, superseded by the updated filings, and that all correspondence from this point forward would need to go through Miss Okafor's office. There was a pause on the line. Then he said, I appreciate that you sought independent counsel, Mrs. Callahan. It was the right thing to do. I thanked him and hung up. That afternoon I went for a walk along the river trail. The trees were in early leaf, that pale translucent green of May in Ontario, the kind of color that only lasts 2 weeks, before it deepens into something more ordinary. I walked slowly, not from difficulty, just because I wanted to see it clearly. I thought about the evening at my son's dining room table. She's been a bit confused lately, said in front of me, about me, as though I were already somewhere else. I was not somewhere else. I had never been somewhere else. I had been sitting right there, holding my hands flat on the table, deciding when to speak. The answer to that, I had learned, was, when you're ready. Not when they expect you to. Not to manage their discomfort or soften the room. When you are ready, and not a moment before. The river was running fast and clear. A pair of Canada geese moved downstream without visible effort, as if the current were simply their natural speed. I stood and watched them until they rounded the bend and were gone. My son texted that evening. Short and careful, the way he'd been since the bank. Mom, I think we should talk, not about the legal stuff, just talk. I read it twice, then I typed back. Thursday, my house, 4 o'clock, I'll make tea. He replied, okay. I put the phone down. Outside, the lilac bush had opened fully. It had been a reliable purple this year, dense and fragrant, exactly what it was meant to be. My son arrived on Thursday at 4, alone this time. Without his coat drawn around him like armor, he sat across from me at the kitchen table, where we had sat 100 times before, over homework and hockey scores and the long quiet dinners after his father died. He did not apologize exactly. What he said was, I think I started making decisions without asking you, and I told myself it was helping, and I'm not sure when one became the other. I looked at him for a long time. That's the most honest thing you've said to me in 2 years, I said. He nodded. He looked tired. I'm not undoing what I've done, I said quietly. But I'm not closing the door either. What happens next is up to you. He wrapped both hands around his mug. The money, he said finally. I should have talked to you. Yes. I thought I told myself you would have said yes anyway. Maybe, I said. But you should have asked. He didn't argue. We sat in the particular silence of people who have known each other long enough to stop pretending. Before he left, he stood by the front door and looked around the hallway, at the photographs on the wall, at the small table with the bowl of keys and the 2 library books I hadn't returned yet. The familiar disorder of a house that was still being lived in. It looks the same, he said. Your house. It is the same, I said. Because it's mine. He nodded once. Then he walked down the porch steps. They didn't creak, my son-in-law had repaired them last autumn, a quiet, unrequested act of care I had not forgotten. I stood in the doorway until his car turned off the street. The evening was cool and clear. Down the block, someone's wind chimes were going in the breeze. I could smell the lilac from the front fence, that particular sweetness that belonged to May and to this house, and to no particular memory I could name exactly, just all of them at once. I went inside, poured the last of the tea, and sat in my husband's chair. I thought about the cognitive assessment results still folded in my coat pocket. 2 independent physicians. No beneficiary involvement. Documented, signed, filed. I thought about my granddaughter's handwriting on a birthday card from last year. Big looping letters that said, "To the strongest woman I know who also makes the best shortbread in Ontario. Love always." I thought about what it meant to be 70 years old and still in your own house, with your own name on the deed, with your own hands on the wheel. It means you are not done. It means every room still belongs to you. It means the story is not being written by anyone else. I picked up the notebook from the side table and turned to a fresh page. At the top I wrote one line. Not a list item, not a task, just a fact. I understood everything. I always did. Then I set down the pen, closed the notebook, and let the house settle around me into the ordinary, irreplaceable quiet of a Tuesday evening in May.